The Pima County Sheriff thinks that whoever went into Nancy Guthrie's house knew what they were after. He thinks this was targeted. Law enforcement is digging deep as the search for the 84-year-old stretches into yet another day. The sheriff admits the suspect or suspects, they've made it hard on the hundreds of investigators working this case. But I will tell you what they may have up their sleeve that the bad guys might not be prepared for. We're on The Case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Genetic genealogy, that's a phrase you are hearing a lot in the case of Nancy Guthrie today. And when I heard that term, I thought about this case.
I don't know how to answer and go into. I don't want to incriminate myself with questions. You guys are professionals. I'm not. I don't know. I really do think I need an attorney. I need to use the phone and I need to call someone and I need legal representation before I respond to anything else.
Okay, that's fine. We're not going to ask you any more questions. There's no tears coming out of your face.
I'm very dry right now.
You're dry?
I'm very dry. I'm parched. I'm dehydrated. You can probably see my eyes are bloodshot red because I'm just tired and drained. I don't know what's going on. You want me to drink water so I can tear? Like, what the f*** is wrong with you?
I don't want you to tear. I just don't want you to...
What are you trying to say?
I'm just trying to say that this seems a little put on.
Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
No.
Oh my God.
Now, that is the interrogation from a case out of Maryland, unrelated to Nancy Guthrie, but it was a murder case that was solved using technology that investigators may now be turning to in the search for Nancy Guthrie. And we will break down that case, how it all went down, in just a moment. As far as Nancy Guthrie and what we know today, that long-awaited DNA test result came back, and it does not seem to be the smoking gun that so many people had hoped for. You had gloves that were found 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home on the side of the road. Those did not match anyone in CODIS, the FBI's national database. DNA found inside of Nancy Guthrie's home. We don't know on what the DNA is, but that sample did not hit on CODIS either. We know that DNA from the house, it doesn't belong to Nancy. It also doesn't belong to members of her family. The CODIS database, it's important to note, only has the profiles of people who have been convicted of crimes or arrested. So we are talking about a pretty small part of the population. The sheriff now says investigators will turn to this new type of technology called genetic genealogy, and it could be huge in this case. Before we dive into that, let's talk about something very interesting that the sheriff of Pima County said in his most recent round of one-on-one interviews with media outlets. Sheriff Chris Nanos says that he believes that the person who you see on Guthrie's front steps in the surveillance video had a target in mind. He also said that this individual, they have made it tough for his investigators, but he says that they are not going to give up. Now, the sheriff went on to say that they're now looking into whether clothing items, including that mask you see the suspect wearing, was purchased at Walmart. Now, the jacket, that appears to be a Walmart item, though it is not exclusively sold there. But I think the mask could be really huge in this case, because you just think of the climate in Tucson. How many people are buying masks like the one we see in the surveillance video? Now, we know that law enforcement have been working with Walmart to try to figure out who might have purchased items that the suspect is wearing. And that backpack is also a big clue because it is only sold at Walmart, no other store. The clothes, they may also be Walmart buys. Now, the sheriff told the media that the time frame on the backpack purchase, and he said this in kind of a conversational way, it could be 20 days ago, it could be 60 days ago as they look back through Walmart's records. Now, the sheriff added in an interview with NBC News that the suspect may also be wearing a ring in the video on the front steps of the house. And then you have that gun holster on his waist. That is somewhat unique. It appears to be a cheap one that you can get at Walmart as well as other stores. Speaking of other stores, the FBI has been going to gun stores in the Tucson area, reportedly with a list of dozens of people and pictures asking if they had been to the stores in the last year. This is according to Fox News, which interviewed a gun store owner who said that agents asked if any of those people on the list look like the person you see in the surveillance video. And again, the time frame is the last year. That person told Fox News, the owner of the gun store, that many of the people had facial hair similar to what we can see in that surveillance video. Now, it is unclear who's on the list, why they're on the list, and also what's behind that last year time frame. That seems like a pretty wide net as investigators continue to try to solve this case. So I now want to talk about genetic genealogy testing. That is a major part of the conversation today in the Nancy Guthrie case. You have this DNA from Nancy Guthrie's home. We don't know whose DNA it is. We don't know if it is DNA connected to the person that you see on her front porch, but we do know it didn't have a match in CODIS, that FBI database that only contains the DNA profiles of people who have been convicted of crimes or arrested. So it is a very small part of the population. Now, the sheriff says that law enforcement will turn to other techniques, including genetic genealogy testing, which is relatively new technology. And it's not as straightforward or quick as it may sound, but there are a lot of cases where it has been a major success. In fact, we talked about a case on this show not too long ago that you may remember that used this technique to crack a cold case that went unsolved for 24 years.
I don't know how to answer and go into. I don't want to incriminate myself with questions. You guys are professionals. I'm not. I don't know. I really do think I need an attorney. I need to use the phone and I need to call someone and I need legal representation before I respond to anything else.
Okay, that's fine. We're not going to ask you any more questions. There's no tears coming out of your face.
I'm very dry right now.
You're dry?
I'm very dry. I'm parched. I'm dehydrated. You can probably see my eyes are bloodshot red because I'm just tired and drained. I don't know what's going on. You want me to drink water so I can tear? Like, what the is wrong with you?
I don't want you to tear. I just don't want
what are you trying to say?
I'm just trying to say that this seems a little put on.
Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
No.
Oh my God.
So this is interrogation video from last year involving a man named Eugene Gligor. He pleaded guilty in 2025 to the murder of Leslie Preer in 2001. Leslie Preer was his girlfriend's mom, and she was found beaten to death inside her home outside Washington, D.C. in Chevy Chase, Maryland. This case went cold for nearly a quarter century until genetic genealogy DNA testing came around. And this is how it played out. There was male DNA found under Leslie Preer's fingernails. It showed that she fought for her life. Investigators, though, they weren't able to identify whose DNA it was for years until these advancements came around where law enforcement can take a DNA sample, that profile, and then compare it to publicly available genetic databases. Think like 23andMe or Ancestry.com, those places where you can submit a DNA sample and it tells you your ancestry and you can find loved ones. But when it comes to solving cases, it has become a very valuable tool. And it may be in the case of Nancy Guthrie. Now, in the Maryland case, law enforcement compared their sample and they found, as they built out a family tree, the highest match being to a man named Gligor, but he lived in Romania. He was a distant cousin of the person who had become a suspect in this case. Now, as law enforcement in Maryland went through this case file, they saw the name Gligor, and it was someone who a neighbor had mentioned that investigators should look into all the way back in 2001, but for some reason, law enforcement didn't do that. Now they felt like they had a really good lead with this genetic genealogy DNA test that they did. So they identify Eugene Gligor, and then they put some surveillance on him. They followed him to an airport, and without him knowing, grabbed a water bottle that he threw away, and they took the DNA from that water bottle and tested it. That DNA was a match to the sample taken off of Leslie Preer 24 years prior. Eugene Gligor was then taken into custody. And this is the part of that interrogation video where the detectives lay out to Eugene how the process works and why they say he was linked to this murder.
So from the crime scene, we have DNA from the person who was there when Leslie died. So there's Leslie's blood all over the place, obviously, but then there's also another DNA profile that was picked up from the crime scene. And we had put that into CODIS, our database from the National CODIS DNA Index System, and it has never hit. So whoever was there, whoever's DNA was also on the scene, has never been arrested. And that's why we were going through doing all of these elimination DNA samples to find out, okay, well, this person couldn't have done it because we matched their DNA to it. So we realized that they never talked to you, never did anything, and we wanted to find out more about you. And if there was any kind of situation where you could have been at the house at that time.
I'm a little confused. So to find out more and talk to me, why not just call me and ask me to come in and talk to me versus have marshals come and arrest me and bring me in? I'm just confused as to why that's the case.
Eugene Gligor pleaded guilty to the 2001 murder of Leslie Preer. He is currently serving 22 years in prison. And this case, it was one of the more compelling interrogation videos you will see.
Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
No.
Oh my God, you're so full of it. You're after. This is the police. This is, yes, like it makes sense. It's in your eyes, it's guilty until proven innocent. I get it.
Well, honey, your DNA was in the crime scene. That's why,
Now, like in that case, in the Nancy Guthrie investigation, detectives will most likely take DNA evidence that they found at her home, and then you compare it to family trees and databases and hope that it can build something out that will lead you to identifying who the person is who left DNA inside of Nancy Guthrie's home. In the 2001 case out of Maryland, it did take investigators roughly a year and a half to complete this investigation, so it is not always an easy process. Now, another case where genetic genealogy had success was in the murder case involving Brian Kohberger, of course, the man who killed 4 University of Idaho students inside of their home. Kohberger left that knife sheath in a bed, and there was DNA on it, and investigators were able to link that sheath to Brian Kohberger through a family connection. The sheriff says that high-tech companies are helping them piece together this case. He says even Meta and Apple have reached out to help. He also says that they're working with the manufacturer of Nancy's pacemaker to see if they can help track where it went. We know that it disconnected from her iPhone in the early hours of the morning on February 1st, and that is the last time on the time frame that she has some sort of contact, according to law enforcement. Law enforcement is also using what is conversationally known as a signal sniffer. It's technology that can be mounted to a drone or a helicopter, and it can try to pick up signals on the ground. Maybe it's a cell phone, maybe it's a pacemaker. So the tech is mounted on a drone or a helicopter and they have to fly very low and very slow over a targeted area. We have been told that it's not something you can use to scan an entire city, and this is relatively new technology. Law enforcement is continuing to also show up at Nancy Guthrie's home. It is unclear what they're looking for at this point. The sheriff says that we also should expect to see more operations like the one that we saw last weekend when a SWAT team raided a home and had a dramatic traffic stop within miles of Nancy Guthrie's home. They detained at least one person. That person has been released. No arrests have been made at this point, and it's also unclear what evidence they may have taken in a federally approved search warrant from that house, though the sheriff says they continue to analyze what was taken from the home. The sheriff also says that investigators continue to track down thousands of leads, and he would not characterize the case of Nancy Guthrie as cold. He wants the public to continue to submit those tips of anything they think could help in this case. The FBI is offering that $100,000 reward for information into finding Nancy Guthrie or the person or people who took her. Join us now to talk more about this case is retired FBI Special Agent and former prosecutor Lance Leising. Thank you, sir, for taking the time to be with us. Genetic genealogy is one of the big headlines of the day, that's what law enforcement may be turning to after the gloves and also the sample that they have, whatever it is, from inside of Nancy Guthrie's home did not match in CODIS. How confident are you that genetic genealogy can be something that potentially could break this case?
So I'm very confident in forensic genetic genealogy. I used it multiple times in cases. So I used to run the Violent Crimes Task Force here in Arizona. We solved multiple, normally serial homicide, serial rapist cases with forensic genetic genealogy. So what that is, all right, you have an unknown DNA at a crime scene. It's usually something very connected to the crime scene. So these gloves that they're finding miles away from the house, you can still use forensic genetic genealogy to try to identify whose DNA that is, but it's not tied directly to the house. Usually it's something directly at the scene when the suspect leaves DNA at the scene. That's why in sexual assault cases you see it used pretty often. So you take that unknown DNA, you run it through CODIS, hoping you get a hit. There's about only 4 to 6% of the population is in CODIS, so that's not very likely, although sometimes you do get a hit. That's the easiest way. But when you don't, then you take that DNA and you submit it to private sector companies that do DNA searching for family histories. And thousands of people submit their DNA voluntarily into that system in order to be connected with other family members they don't know or built a family tree for them. So you submit the unknown subject's DNA in that system and you hope to get a hit. And you don't usually get a hit on the actual subject, but what you do is you get a hit on a family member. It could be a mother or father, could be a second cousin, third cousin, even fourth cousin. It could be well removed. But what that does is it gives you a suspect list. You create a family tree then from the known relative, and somewhere in that family tree, you've got the DNA owner that is now tied to the scene. It's like pulling a suspect out of thin air. When it works, it's amazing. It does work with the right type of DNA connected to the right place at a scene. So I'm confident if they have that, it can work.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see some of those cases. I know people have talked about Brian Koberger and how it was used in identifying him out of Idaho. I mean, it's just, fascinating technology. As far as the time it could take, if they were to start doing this now, whatever the sample is, the piece of evidence where they have DNA that is not Nancy Guthrie's from her home, and they say, okay, we're going to use genetic genealogy now, like what's the first step and how long, especially in a case like this that's high profile, that it could take to get some of the results back?
Yeah, it's submitting them to multiple different private companies that do that just as a customer, really, is how they're submitting it. Nothing special, no warrant needed, so there's no delay there because it's all volunteer DNA into these systems. Then it depends on how close you are to a match to the suspect. It really depends on how quickly you can then build that family tree and solve it. If it's a fourth cousin, you've got a lot of work to do there. And that suspect, that list, the family tree could be dozens and dozens of people. But then you do basic investigative steps to narrow that down. Who's living in the right areas, whose physical description matches, likely, but you can exclude a lot of the females from there because at least the individual seen in the surveillance photograph was unlikely to be female. So you can whittle that down pretty quickly. Time frame, I would normally say a couple weeks. It would take one of our cases maybe to find a solution. Here, you've got a lot more investigators, a lot more resources going at this case than you would a typical case. So faster than that, a week potentially.
Yeah, I mean, it's and again, like incredible technology when you think of what it could do, and we'll see how it plays out. They haven't specifically said, at least as far as I know, of like what that DNA, what did they find in the house that they consider to
Hmm.
be the DNA, where they were able to say this isn't Nancy Guthrie and it's not a member of
Hmm.
her family's DNA. And not to speculate, but like, what are some of the possibilities of what that may be based on what we know?
Anybody in that house in any reasonable period of time could be leaving DNA. It could be a worker, it could be a maintenance person, could be a landscaper that went inside and used the bathroom or just touched a door handle. There is so much we don't know about inside the walls of that crime scene. We're seeing a lot overtly outside the walls, and we see the surveillance video images that took place outside the house. We don't know what investigators have from the inside. And I imagine they have some evidence that is leading them at least to a theory on motive and a direction that they're heading, but we don't know. And we don't know specifically where the DNA was found, what kind of DNA it was. Was it just touch DNA of multiple people? Was it very specific DNA left behind that they're pretty certain it was the suspects? We just don't know. So it could lead them down a lot of dead ends. Like if you're following just a touch DNA off of doorknobs, you might have some DNA there that's been there for a long period of time and it was a worker or a guest that had been in the home weeks prior. So those would be dead ends. you're looking for something more connected to that night. So let's say they do have some surveillance images from that night. You do see a suspect touch certain things or go in certain areas. DNA from those touches would directly implicate the suspect.
And as far as the gloves, do you read into anything that these gloves, that they felt they were very specific? I know the line from the FBI in Phoenix was that they appear to match. And I wasn't sure if that meant because they were this latex alternative, which so many people have just for like cleaning their house, if that's what they meant by it, or if there's anything more to it. But the fact it reached the bar that we're going to submit this to CODIS and we're going to talk about it publicly, even though it didn't have a hit in CODIS, is there something about the gloves where those may not be completely in the past tense when looking at this case going forward?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if the public comment from the FBI about that they were a match or even definitely not submitting it to CODIS was because they are so assured that it's from the suspect. I think submitting it to CODIS is a normal process. They would do that for anything likely that they obtained. So I think that's just routine investigation there. Why the FBI came out and said it's a match, that's pretty definitive, saying match rather than resembled or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to know what else they know there because we don't know. The gloves on the surveillance camera, sure they were like the nitrile style gloves, those black gloves that tons of different occupations use, but there was some thickness to those gloves. If you remember, it looked like there could have been layers underneath there, maybe another glove underneath, or it was a type of nitrile glove that has an insulated layer or a chemical layer underneath it. If that's what they found, and it is that thickness, that's a little more rare. I mean, that's actually much more rare than your typical nitrile gloves. So I'm hoping it's something like that that leads investigators to think, hey, this is the glove that came from the scene, but we just don't know.
Yeah, because as someone who's received a lot of FBI statements and press releases, they're always, as you know, very specific with the wording that they use. You know, it's not like they have an intern that just punches one out
Right,
to respond
right.
to media requests. The sheriff did say, and he's been doing these one-on-one interviews with different media outlets, but he did say that he believes, and he called it a hunch, that this was targeted. And I know that there was a report out earlier in the week with a local television station in Phoenix saying that the working theory is that this was a burglary and then it became a kidnapping. That seemed to have been pushed back by law enforcement a little bit. And knowing that there's a lot that we don't know, where are you at just looking at this case of whether this was a burglary, whether this was targeted, and what we can think might have happened here?
Yeah, well, I guess you have to go back to the definition of targeted. What does that mean? I do think this was targeted. Now, it could be a burglary that they targeted this individual because maybe a worker had been in there prior and they told a friend, hey, I'm doing work on a house. There's an 85-year-old lady in there. She has a lot of money. You know, she's not there very often, something like that. And then he goes directly to that house. That's a target. That's targeted to Nancy and her house because of information that they gleaned. I do think this was likely targeted in some way. Now, whether it's targeted because Nancy is Savannah's mother or if it's targeted because she's just an easy victim that apparently has money, we'll see. I do think the high probability is that this individual had a motive as he was going into that house to commit a crime. Now that could have been burglary, could have been assault, it could have been multiple different reasons, and Nancy could have been targeted for any of those. It's likely something went wrong inside that house. Nancy got hurt. That's evidenced by the blood that's coming out of the door. And then that individual panics. And then they try to hide what they've done. They try to hide evidence. And that would include Nancy potentially if she was mortally wounded during that. So that is kind of that's the theory. Is it targeted? Yeah, it's targeted, but maybe not for kidnapping purposes. I highly doubt this is a kidnapping still, and I have from the start, and it's mainly because this does not follow a typical pattern for a kidnapping. If it's financially motivated, the first financial request for money came days later. No kidnapper is holding on to a fragile victim like this for multiple days to care for her in order to get money in the end. Usually it's pressure. It's right now. It's demand for money. They don't want to hold on to that victim at all. So it just seems unlikely that it's for a financial motive.
And I just think too, like, you know, an 84-year-old woman with health issues in need of medication. I just keep going back to that. And it's like, you know, not that criminals are always
He was
the most
injured. Yeah,
injured as
and
well. Like,
injured. Hmm.
yeah, like not the most well thought out group of people, criminals, but at the same time, like if you were to kidnap someone, it just seems like the last person, even if she had all the money in the world, to do it.
And yes.
No,
And
go ahead.
your first communication is with the family because it's just like scammers too. They prey on the urgency of it and the chaos of that initial call. Like scammers would do that based on your bank accounts being depleted as we speak. You can't get off the phone with me. You have to do this kind of thing. Same thing with kidnappers. They don't involve the police. I need you to communicate. I need you to send this money right now. We have her right here. Here's you can even put her in line or say something that only she knows, and it's that chaos, that urgency, that demand for money that usually gets the money, and then they're gone. They don't want anything to do with caring for a victim, let alone a 20-year-old healthy victim compared to an 85-year-old fragile victim. So it doesn't follow any of those motives. And then ideology is another motive. It could be an ideological kidnapping. But that doesn't make sense here either. There's been no ideological statement, no cause that they're after. State letters to media agencies would make sense in the case if there was a statement displaying a cause. We haven't seen that either. So that falls to other motives, and different crime is one, mental health or delusion is another, and a domestic dispute, a family dispute, which doesn't seem to be the case here. That's another.
And the sheriff's also talked about, I think he was pushing back on the idea that Nancy would be in Mexico, or that the suspect has gone to Mexico. And I've crossed through Nogales before, and you drive through. It's very easy to drive through. Like they're not asking questions, they're not checking papers. Like it's welcome, welcome over, and then there's a lot more questions on the way back. You worked in Arizona. I mean, how often are suspects getting away successfully, crossing over into Nogales, and then driving through Mexico? Where if this was a case where this person sees the video released and goes, oh boy, they might be on to me, and then he crosses the border. Like, how likely is that?
I think it's unlikely just because there are no indicators of cross-border kidnapping here. The way that subject approached in the surveillance videos doesn't appear to be related to any kind of organized crime within Mexico. It's not professional in that way. I mean, there are multiple theories you can have around that surveillance video. I've heard some saying that that individual wasn't the first person at the house. They were just called to help clean up afterwards. Like there's all kind of theories out there, but nothing is indicating, yes, this is a cross-border type of kidnapping. And again, for what motive? I mean, for what end? It's not financial gain that doesn't appear. It's not for an ideological motive that it appears. So I know the sheriff mentioned something about revenge, and revenge is a motive. I kind of think it falls in that delusional kind of motive category because it doesn't have to be a rational grievance that the suspect has, just a perceived grievance, something that they believe, but maybe nobody else believes. And maybe this subject did suffer from some mental illness and had some delusion that Nancy was responsible, or whoever lived in this house was responsible for something bad that happened to him. That's always possible with mental health and delusion. You can't put rationality to it, right? So that's always a possibility too. I think investigators have to keep all that open.
And with this case, and I've heard from so many people who say, like, when you watch the surveillance video, it doesn't look like this person is the most sophisticated criminal in the world. But also, like, it's been 17, 18 days. 400 FBI agents are working this. The president's involved and has, pledged his full support. Apple and Meta are now offering their help. We have the signal sniffer that's flying around, and I know that's new technology. It just seems like every single ounce of law enforcement strength is being put into this case. And yet this person who seems like such an amateur on camera is still at large, and we don't know where Nancy is. Like, not asking like the rhetorical question of like, how have we not arrested this guy? But like, when you look at the early parts of the investigation and maybe some of the steps along the way, like, where is it in cases like this that someone can get away and make it so difficult for law enforcement?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's the old adage, even a blind squirrel finds a nut sometimes. I mean, I have chased criminals that I thought were extremely smart. And once I finally catch them, I realized that they were just lucky for a period of time. This individual that you see in the surveillance camera, it's not like they did it on a whim. Like they definitely put some thought into it. They thought about their appearance and disguising that. They thought about not leaving for DNA at the scene or any forensic evidence. So they've thought through a few things. I didn't think the decision-making process made a lot of sense at the doorstep, whether they grabbed the bush and tried to use that to conceal
Mhm.
their identity, then taking that doorbell camera, which isn't smart either, and a couple other, and being surprised by the doorbell camera. I think that was fairly clear from the surveillance video. So those decisions show a lack of planning in a certain area and maybe irrational decisions, but they did take some steps to conceal who they are, and that's helping to confound the issue. If um, yeah, it's there are so many options and not options, but opportunities for a suspect to become lucky to not leave DNA, and investigators just missing that. You did mention missteps in the beginning, and I do think there were a few. Hindsight being 2020, it's easy to second
Sure.
guess that, but I think even the sheriff has come out and say I wouldn't have turned over that scene so fast, and I would agree with that. There was no pressure to turn over that scene. That should have been held. Would that have provided a break in the case? Probably not, but we don't know without knowing the facts. We just don't know.
And then just lastly, I don't know if you have, friends or colleagues in Arizona who have been working this case.
Mhm.
But like, what's the morale at this point? Like from FBI agents, like
Yeah,
just as this case continues on and there's so much public attention, almost public frustration that nothing, I'm sure they're frustrated as well, but like, just what are
yeah.
you hearing from people who in Arizona who have been working this case?
I think they were really hopeful when the surveillance images came out that that was going to be a watershed moment and that would quickly lead to an arrest. I think we saw some detentions and search warrants since that time, and I think they were all very hopeful for those. But in a case where you have an outstanding victim who's in danger, you're leaning forward in an investigation. You're probably detaining people, interviewing people, doing search warrants earlier than you would in an investigation that doesn't involve somebody imminently in danger. So you run the risk of hitting a dry hole once in a while or detaining an individual that turns out to be non-involved at all. So I think their hopes were high at that point. Now you're getting to the point where it's definitely a slog. It is a slow moving process. You've got thousands upon thousands of tips. As a field agent, you're getting tip after tip. And after covering 100, 200 tips that were irrelevant or didn't lead anywhere, then you kind of human nature sets in. You're like, oh, another one, like it's hard to keep that momentum up. It's up to the leaders in the FBI and the sheriff's office to keep the momentum up of those investigators. I hope they're collaborating real well. Once you get a little bit of dissension plus the slog of an investigation like this, it can unravel quickly. I don't see any signs of that here. I mean, I think they're working well together, but I think it's a slog at this point. Yeah.
Yeah. And you just think being out there every single day, just hoping that you come up with, that moment that could crack the case. And there's so many
Yeah.
people working on it. And, certainly they're continuing to work hard on it, which is good. And everybody's still hoping for a happy ending. Lance Lysing, retired FBI special agent, former prosecutor. Thank you for being with us on Law and Crime. This was great.
Thank you for having me.
If you have information on Nancy Guthrie, you can contact the Pima County Sheriff at 520-351-4900. And you can also contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or go to tips.fbi.gov. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and we are also now streaming on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.